I'm Jilly G. Welcome to my kitchen. Today is something special. Today is my 100th video. So I thought I would make a pie. And I know you've seen some pies before, but I haven't showed you a lemon meringue pie yet. And before we get started with the recipe, I just want to say thank you so much for everybody that has recently subscribed to my channel. I just can't believe how many people have come over. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for commenting. I love hearing all of the comments. And when you guys share your stories, it's really interesting. I've been learning so much. And when you're from different states and different countries, it's really amazing that we can all get connected even though we're so far apart. So for another milestone that's coming up very soon is my 1-year anniversary. And I wanted to do something a little different. I was gonna do a question and answer video for you guys. If you've ever had any questions about my recipes or gluten-free or even me, feel free to ask those questions. Leave those in the comment section, or you can ask me those questions on Instagram. And I'll do my best to answer those during my question and answer video. But start submitting them now, and I'll take questions up until about February 9th. That way it will give me time to get those all answered and put in a video for you. And I also want to say thank you so much to my patrons. You guys help me so much. I really appreciate you. Thank you so much for supporting me. And if you're curious about becoming a patron, the link is below in my description box. You can check that out if you're interested. Also, my Instagram link is there too. And I always put my recipes in the description box. I've had a couple of questions about those, but they're always in the description box. And once in a while, I forget to put an ingredient in there. So thank you so much for those of you that remind me that I left one out. I appreciate that too. But thank you so much for everybody that is here watching my videos and making my recipes. So now for our recipe, lemon meringue pie. I don't always make the meringue topping for my lemon pies. Not everybody likes the meringue, and so a lot of times I'll just make the pie and just use whipped cream as my topping. But today I'll show you the meringue, which meringue sometimes can be tricky, but we'll get to that later. So first up is the pie crust. And I've got my oven preheating to 475. I've got 1/3 cup and 1 tablespoon of butter. And I've already cut it up. If butter is really cold out of the fridge, it's really hard to manage with a pastry blender. So to my butter, 1 cup of my gluten-free flour and 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And then I have 1 egg that we'll be mixing in. That is because I don't have the xanthan gum in my flour recipe. And this is the binding that will hold our crust together. So you want to cut in the butter until it resembles, pea-size crumbs is what we're looking for. And I've mentioned before, a butter knife is so handy to get this butter that sticks to the pastry blender. And once you think you're getting close, I take my fork and stir it around just to see what's happening. And we're almost there. I still have some pretty big chunks of butter. So my butter was firm enough that it cut into big chunks, but it didn't just mash into the dough. And you want it to be this crumbly looking mixture. If you've ever been a little intimidated by making a pie crust, gluten-free pie crust, while challenging, is actually a little bit easier to work with than a regular floured pie crust. There was always the concern about developing the gluten in your flour, but we don't have to worry about that in this flour. And that's looking really good. So with my same fork, I'm just gonna mix my egg. And I've got cold water. We're only gonna use maybe a tablespoon or 2, maybe 3. If you're not using the egg in your pie crust, you'll probably need a little bit more water. So I'm gonna mix in my egg first, and then we'll see how much water we need. And I've also mentioned before, weather really does make a difference on your pie crust. And all that it means is that you just might have to add a little bit extra water or a little bit less water. And I just need a little bit of water here. There's a little bit of dry pockets. And this is looking really good. And what you're looking for, even though it looks really crumbly, if you gather up a little bit and you squish it and it holds together, it's ready. And my oven is ready too. And a bowl scraper, so handy for gathering all of it in your bowl or scraping it out of your bowl. And then I have a piece of parchment paper for rolling and some extra gluten-free flour. Just go a little bit to start. And I've got a 9-inch pie dish. It's not really a deep dish pie dish, but the funny thing is I was talking about my pies when I was making my Thanksgiving pies and how a lot of recipes were made for 8-inch pie dishes. So this just means that this pie will probably have a little bit taller of a crust with not as much filling. But we'll be putting the meringue topping on top, so it will be okay. So I just gather my dough into a ball. You could do this the day before and put it in the fridge and then let it sit out for about 30 minutes before rolling. And you don't want to use a whole lot of extra flour, but you don't want it to stick either. But try to keep it in a circular shape and flour underneath it and keep it moving. And if you notice that it's really cracking apart like this and you're having a hard time managing it, no worries at all. Just start over. Just mash it back together and start over. And if you notice that some of the edges are cracking, just pat those back together too. And you see where mine's kind of splitting in the middle a little bit. That's just fine. Get your pie dish and hold it over your crust and measure about how big you need your crust to be. And I think I need to go just a little bit bigger. Make sure it's all even thickness. That's looking pretty good. And I think my pie crust stuck to my parchment paper. Oh, maybe not as bad as I thought. Oh, yeah, not near as bad as I thought. So a little bit of flour. And use the parchment paper to help. And if it breaks apart, just very gently squish it together. And I will flour a little bit there so it doesn't stick to itself. Give myself some more room. Bring over your pie dish, and then we'll just gently place our crust on our pie. Gluten-free pie crust will always break. But just carefully ease it in. We can just squish it all back together. You want to make sure it's in the corners, but with this extra dough, you just build up the sides where it kind of broke off, and you're good to go. Flour your fingers if you need to. If you notice that your crust is getting a little bit too soft and challenging to work with, just stick it in the fridge and let it firm up for a few minutes. And I'm not going too high above the rim of the pan. And I'm just checking that everything is pretty well the same thickness all the way around. And then, as always, my favorite edging. And with our same fork, we're going to dock the crust. And you even want to do the sides. So what we want to do now is pre-bake our crust. Double check your edges. So I've got another piece of parchment paper here. Be careful not to tear it. The reason for crumpling it up is it fits a lot easier into our pie crust. So very carefully, put your parchment paper in your crust. You want to try to go all the way to the edges, but don't mess up your edging. And then I have a jar of rice. You can use beans or pie weights, whatever. Rice is good, beans are good. And I just put in the whole jar, and then I spread it out so it's going to the edges. And the reason for this is so our pie crust doesn't puff up and create a big bubble where your filling won't be able to go. If you don't have any parchment paper, you can use foil to line the inside of your pie. Into the oven for about 8 to 10 minutes. And what I'm going to do is take out the rice, put it on here, and then go back in the oven for just a few more minutes. Probably a minute, maybe 2. But very carefully. I just want a little bit more color on the bottom. I know a lot of people will egg wash their crust before they bake it. And that kind of creates a good seal so you have a crispy crust, but I've never had a trouble with that. But I just want a little bit more color, and I think the fear of having a bubble is past. And I just lightly feel it. Make sure it's not doughy. So I'm going to let this cool off for about 10 minutes. So I'm going to turn the oven down to 400 instead of 475. Once we put the meringue on, we'll throw it back in the oven for a few minutes. Now that my crust is cooling off, I'm getting my lemon filling ready. And we just need a ½ cup of lemon juice and 1½ cups of water. So I've got 1½ cups of water here and my little strainer just to catch any seeds. I've got 4 lemons. So far, I think I might just need 2. You never know how juicy a lemon is going to be. And it looks like I might need 3 lemons. Looks like 3 lemons did the trick. Almost forgot my hot pad. So what we're going to do first is 1½ cups of water and ½ cup of lemon juice in our saucepan. I'm going to rinse out my little measuring cup here so I can put my egg yolks in it. I don't want the lemon in here to curdle my egg yolks before I have a chance to cook them. So to my saucepan with water and lemon juice, I'm going to put a 3/4 cup of honey. As always, I'll give you the equivalents to sugar. And I don't know if you've ever doubled a lemon pie recipe before, but you're not supposed to. And I didn't believe whoever told me that you're not supposed to, and I tried it anyways, and it didn't work. And I don't know the scientific reason behind why it didn't work. So my advice to you, enter at your own risk. And the color of lemon pie is up to you. I prefer the natural color. It will be a little bit golden from the egg yolks and from the honey, but if you wanted to add lemon food coloring, go right ahead. And that was 1/3 cup plus 1 tablespoon of cornstarch. And just mix this together till the cornstarch is kind of not in big clumps. And the honey won't really dissolve until we start cooking it. And I'm gonna get that started over about medium-low heat while I crack my eggs. We want yolks in here and whites in here. And this is just 3 eggs. Ooh. But I always pick out these little white bits from the egg just so they're not in my cream pie. And it saves a step of having to strain it later. You could use a hand mixer, but a whisk is fine. It's just 3 egg yolks. And I'm just going to use my same whisk to mix in my honey, cornstarch, and water and lemon juice. And my honey is already dissolved in there. If you're using white sugar, it would take a little bit longer. We want this to come up to a boil over medium heat, and then we'll boil and stir for 1 minute. And you can see how thick it's getting, but it's not quite boiling yet. Boil and stir for 1 minute. And while whisking your egg yolks, pour in half of your lemon mixture. And then I give it a really good mix. And same thing, while whisking, pour the egg mixture back in. And we want to boil and stir for 1 more minute. After that next minute has passed, I've got 3 tablespoons of butter, and I've cut it up into small pieces just so it melts a little bit quicker. But while whisking, I'm just going to dump these in. Maybe. And you just want to whisk until the butter is all melted. It won't take very long. Pour your filling into the pie crust. I always put it back on the cooling rack, but first thing we need to do, and actually I don't need to put it back on the cooling rack, but you want to put the plastic wrap all the way to the edges of the crust, touching the filling. This will prevent a skin from forming on your pudding or lemon filling. And it's a really pretty yellow color. But again, if you wanted to use food coloring to make it a brighter yellow, you could. Usually, when I'm doing just a regular lemon cream pie, I'll put it back on a cooling rack to cool off. Because this is going to go back into the oven after we make the meringue topping, I'll just set it right there. I have a different set of a hand mixer than you've seen before. Sometimes people will comment on my dishes and that you remember those from when you were a kid, or you had them, or your family members had them. This was my grandma's hand mixer. My other hand mixer kind of exploded the other day. Scared me to death, but it was okay, but it just doesn't work. And I've saved this one in the basement, and it still works really good. So I've got my egg whites here. I've got a 1/4 teaspoon of cream of tartar, about a 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla, and 3 tablespoons of honey. We just want to mix our egg whites and cream of tartar just till they're a little bit frothy, and then we'll add in the honey. That looks pretty good. So 3 tablespoons of honey into our egg whites and cream of tartar. And we want to whip these till they're stiff peaks, and then we'll whip in the vanilla. I think that's looking pretty good. We still have a little bit more mixing to do. I've got my vanilla to pour in now. And I think those look pretty good. Bring back your pie. very carefully take off the plastic wrap. It will stick, but it does prevent it from forming a skin. And I go a little bit at a time, kind of around the edges, and then we'll spread it out. And then with an offset spatula, spread it out all the way to the crust. You want it to touch the crust and seal, so hopefully it won't shrink. And then you can make whatever kind of a design that you want on top. Okay, that looks really good. It's cool enough I can touch it without my hot pads. Back into the oven for about 8 to 10 minutes. And now we wait. Wait for it to cool off. Hopefully I have sealed my meringue around my pie crust that it won't shrink away. I don't know if you've ever had trouble with meringue. Sometimes my meringue will just shrink on one side and then I'll have a gap, but we'll see. Hopefully I did a good job and it will stay against the side of the crust. So once this cools off to room temperature, I'll stick it in the fridge at least 4 hours. Overnight sometimes is best, but we'll check it in 4 hours and see if it will hold a slice. Well, my meringue shrunk, but it still looks pretty good. And it's kind of fallen over a little. It was in the fridge for about 4 hours or so. It's really good. You never know how tart your lemons are going to be, but these ones are perfect. And the meringue isn't very sweet, but it's light and airy. Perfect lemon pie. Turn this around so you can see. It's holding a slice really well. Even though my crust fell over and my meringue shrunk, it's still a really good pie. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.